Welcome to With All My Heart, a podcast hosted by Joanna Coburnett, pastor's wife at Victory Baptist Church in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. This podcast is designed to help ladies of all ages with the principles of the Word of God. In this podcast, we will explore what it means to love God with all our hearts. Through Bible lessons, we will discover how to deepen our relationship with the Lord and experience His love in a more personal way. As we journey together, let's open our hearts to the unchanging truths of God's Word.
Thank you so much for listening in today and for joining us for another week of With All My Heart. And I hope you're having a great week. I hope you had a great 4th of July holiday, that maybe got to watch some fireworks or spend some time with family and friends. I know I always love these special days, and I hope you're enjoying your time together. I am looking forward to this Sunday, our Patriotic Sunday at church, and especially on Sunday night, we're going to have a hot dog fellowship with ice cream sandwiches and sparklers for the kids afterwards. So I hope you'll plan to be here. I know it's a busy time, but we'll have a great time together as always in God's house. And so thank you so much for listening in, and I look forward to seeing you this Sunday. We are going to deviate a little bit from our studies of ladies in the Bible. I hoped you enjoyed the devotional last week with Kelly Bybee. She always does such a great job, and I know my heart is always so encouraged to hear from her. But I've spent some time actually this summer and thinking about my own summers growing up. And I don't know if you're like me, but for me, I can hardly believe that here we are already at the end of the first week of July. And our summer, as far as the time that the kids get out of school for all practical purposes, it's already over halfway over. And we're already starting to think about, the back to school uniforms and supplies and getting ready for another school year. And sometimes it's a little sobering to me just how quickly these days pass by. I remember when I was a young mom, and of course I jumped in with two right away. I never knew what it was like to just have one at home, just one to take care of. I had the twins. And I remember sometimes those days would seem very, very long. And I remember the first time somebody told me the little phrase, and I know you've heard it many times, but that the days are long, but the years are short. And I remember then, whenever you're changing mountains of diapers and it seems like somebody needs something from you every second of the day, you don't really believe that. But it is true. And then I remember another phrase, and actually my dad's dad used to say it to him. He would tell my dad whenever we're getting ready to drive back to Iowa and leave all of our aunts and uncles and our grandparents and our cousins in Western North Carolina, and he would always encourage us to stay in touch, to call, to come to visit. And he would always look at my dad and he would say, son, the years have a way of slipping away. And I am not that old yet, and my children are still young, but I've seen that is true. And the years do pass away so quickly. And so I was thinking, I know you've heard some of these quotes, some of these things, but as moms, sometimes we hear things like how many summers that we have with our children. I was thinking about Lacey and Savannah are going into 7th grade this fall. And if things play out like they do for most people, I'm going to have 5 summers left before they are headed off to college. And then I know I'm going to look forward to embracing their young adult years, and we'll still have time together, but it won't be the same as whenever they're children growing up in our home. And when I stop and think about, I only have 5 summers left, it can make me a little sad. I'm sure you've seen the videos that will show, the little clips that will show how quickly a child can grow up. There was one I watched a few months ago, and it was about a child's room and just what it looks like as a baby. And then the next shot was to toddler room, and the next shot was elementary, and then junior high and high school and college. And then they were off into adulthood. And it does go by so fast. I think another thing that sometimes I'll see, and it makes me sad, but you never know when you're experiencing a last. I've got 5 children, and if you were to ask me when the last time was that Lacey or Savannah, they're my twins that are 12, if they called me to say, Mom, come help me brush my hair, or the last time that Chloe, she's 8, that she called me to come help her wash her hair in the bathtub, or Micah to help him get dressed, or just to do those little things that if you're a mom with young ones, you feel like are never ending. But what's sad is for each of us as moms, as grandmothers, as caregivers, there is a time when it is our last time. And so sometimes in the summertime, I know we all are wanting to give our children the very best memories. And we're wanting to give them things that they look back and they just love their childhood and they love the time spent with family. But if we're not careful, social media and our culture and our society, they tell us that if we don't plan the biggest vacations, if we don't supply the nicest things and take them to the nicest restaurants and do the biggest, most elaborate things, that we aren't really giving them the best. And I spent some time thinking, as I thought back over my own childhood, I thought, those are not the things that I remember. In fact, the things that I remember, the memories of mine that matter the most, they are of things that probably did not cost my parents anything, or if they did, it was just a little bit. It wasn't a lot. And those are the things that really mean the most. I am thankful for the trips that my dad and my mom took us on. And I love them. We had good times together. But when I really look back and I remember the best memories, they weren't at a fancy vacation. They weren't at a nice restaurant or doing just the big expensive things. But they were the little things, the time spent with family, the time spent at home. And so I spent some time thinking this week, and I just wanted to share with you the memories that I look back that matter the most. And I had to think of that verse in Psalm 16:6 when it says, "The lines are fallen unto me in pleasant places. Yea, I have a goodly heritage." And I sat here today, and if you've listened very often into these podcasts over this last year and a half, I am so very grateful for the home and the heritage that my parents gave to me. I'm so very grateful for all that they invested into me. I'm so very grateful for their consistency. And I thought about that verse, and I thought about the summers that I spent at home. And of course, my dad did so much to make our home and our family a wonderful place, but it was really my mom who was there at home with us, day in and day out, through those long hours of the day, that she is what made home special. And so this challenge today, it's for the mothers, it's for the aunts, it's for the grandmothers, the caregivers. It's just to encourage you. I read a quote this week, and it says, "If you are a mother, motherhood is your ministry, so you need look no further." And I had to ask myself, Joanna, how am I doing in my ministry? I wear a lot of hats besides being a mother. I try to be a pastor's wife. I try to be a good pastor's wife for you all. There's different things, a lot of different things that I do with the church, and I'm involved in a lot of different things. But next to my relationship with the Lord and my relationship with my husband, my most important thing that I'll ever do is being a mother. The Bible commands us to be a keeper at home. I don't believe that means that we cannot have other interests or other jobs or other things that we do outside of the home. But I think we have to realize that our first priority is to be a keeper at home. And I am so burdened when I look at homes, when I look at families, and I'm afraid that starting with myself, that sometimes that we're not keeping the home like we should. And so this week, as I was burdened and I wanted to give my kids the very best summer, I want to make the memories that matter. I want them to have times that they look back and they think, we had a wonderful childhood with mom. And I remember childhood with my own mom. I remember the summers with my own mom. And there were several things that stood out to me, and I just want to share them really quick. And maybe there'll be some things that you can take and that can encourage your heart to just spend time with your kids and do it for your kids. I remember the little things. Again, it wasn't the fancy things that we did that matter the most, but I remember the little things. I remember when I was really little, we had an old Volkswagen Bug. We had a couple cars. We had a gray station wagon, but we kind of had a beater car of a Volkswagen Bug that my dad had bought. And I think at that time there was only like 4 or 5 of us kids. But I can remember when Dad would get home, and I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and he would get out all our fishing stuff, and he would load us up in that Volkswagen Bug, and he would take us to a farmer's fishing pond. And we would fish. I remember going down through the tall weeds, and I remember catching fish and then coming back up and crawling in the back of that Volkswagen Bug and maybe having a snack and then going home. And there were so many memories. There was nothing that cost anything. In fact, a lot of people, that's a really country experience. But so many good memories of just being with my dad and with my mom and having good times together. I remember bike rides where we would take a ride around uptown and then stop by the local corner creamery for an ice cream cone. I remember family devotions. Especially in the summer, I loved it whenever my dad would have a bonfire and we'd roast some marshmallows, and then he would get out his guitar and he would sing and he would tell us a story from the Bible. I remember those times. I remember the little things. I remember the love. And mom's love, again, we were not spoiled. Probably sometime mom gave us the tough love, but mom's way of showing love was just by being there for us, by listening to us, a listening ear. She was there for us. She was there to care for us. She was there to discipline us. I remember when I was about 10 years old and I was frustrated because I had gotten in trouble and I thought my parents were too stern. And I remember a friend of mine, she looked at me and she came from a troubled home. She came from a home that the parents were not very involved. And she said, Joanna, she said, I wish that my parents cared enough about me, that they loved me enough to discipline me. And I've never forgotten that. And I remember it was kind of sobering because even though I didn't like the discipline, I didn't like the rules that my parents had set, it made me stop and think and realize that it was coming from a place of love. I remember a lot of hard work. So many times I would come down in the morning and my mom would have a big breakfast made of bacon and eggs. I remember a clean house. I often thought as I got older, my mom never talked about a schedule. She never made us feel like we were rigid or that, we had to do certain things. But I realized after I got older with my own kids that a clean house doesn't just happen by accident. And with 7 children and keeping a house that was clean and organized and in order and the laundry done up and the meals cooked and keeping us all in line, that didn't just happen by accident. And I realized that mom was very structured. I remember it was a lot of hard work, and I remember she taught us to work hard. My husband was talking about this last Sunday morning that he had no idea. We had no idea what an allowance was. And I think I remember, again, a similar story to his. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and one of my friends said something about getting an allowance. And so I asked my dad when we were going to get an allowance, and he just laughed because that wasn't going to happen in our home. But I loved it because my parents from an early age would always give us jobs to do and ways that we can earn money. And when I was about 10 years old, my mom took us and we started getting jobs of mowing yards and helping older ladies clean their houses. And that's the way we would work. And I didn't even realize it, but how hard that mom was working to teach us to work. My mom came from, her dad was the hardest working man that I have ever known. And he passed that on to her. He was a German and he was a hard worker and he passed that on to her. And I have it myself, I hope. But I remember a lot of hard work. And then I remember a listening ear. So many times at the end of the day, especially as we got up into junior high or high school, and I don't remember my mom ever sitting around a lot. In fact, I rarely remember her sitting. She was always working. She was always getting things done, taking care of us. But sometimes at the end of the day, she would come in and she would sit on our beds and she would just talk to us. And more than that, she would listen to us and she would listen to us talk. And what I didn't even realize at the time is she was gleaning from us. She was learning about us. She was learning about our hearts. And she wasn't our friend in the sense that she gave us everything that we wanted or she told us what we wanted to hear. She gave us a lot of tough love. But she listened to us and she listened for our hearts and she was very wise. My mom could pick up when we were going through a hard time. She could pick up on what we needed. And I remember a listening ear. And then I remember this. I remember the Lord's house. So many of my very best memories were made in our backyard. They were made around our kitchen table and they were made in the Lord's house. When the doors of the church were open, we were there. We had the best memories. We would get so excited about whatever was going on at church, special services, old-fashioned day. I remember tent meetings out under a tent, and it would be hot, and there was sawdust that would get inside my sandals. But I can still remember that fiery preaching, and I remember the singing. And there was something that stirred in my heart as a little girl and said, this is what I want. And I read a quote recently, and it struck home, and I'm afraid it's true of so many of our homes today. But I know most of us would say that God's house is important. I know most of us would say that we need to be faithful to church. But so much more than the words we speak, it's what we're really doing. And I'm afraid that with our practice, with what we're actually doing, that we're teaching our children that God's house is optional. Yes, we'll go to church when the weather's good and when it's convenient and when we feel like it. But man, if we've got a chance to get out of town, we're going to go. And there's nothing wrong with vacations. I hope you go, but I hope you're in church on Sunday when you're on vacation. Because you know what? If our children learn that God's house is optional, if they learn that it can be pushed aside and rescheduled, or we'll just catch it later on the live stream, if they learn from our example that God's house is optional, this is what was said, that they will soon decide in their own lives that God's house is unnecessary. And if I could just challenge you, I'm seeing that play out in people's lives. I'm seeing it play out in young people's lives. And Our children need the Lord's house. They need to sit under preaching. They need to be taught the Word of God. It is their only hope. Loving the Lord and serving Him in the ways, His ways, are our only hope for our next generation. And so I would challenge you today. Yes, take your family on vacation. Yes, take your family on the trips and the big, nice restaurants if you can do that. But even when you can't, remember that it's the little things that make the difference. It's the love. It's the spending time together. It's just enjoying being together. It's a mom and dad that love each other. It's loving your children. That's what children will remember, and that's what the best memories are made of. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday, and I look forward to being with you again next week. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to With All My Heart, a ladies' devotional podcast with Joanna Coburnett. We hope that you have been encouraged and challenged to deepen your love for Christ and be more like Him today. God loves us, and we should love Him in return. Until next time, keep seeking Him with all your heart.